Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me today to talk about the joys and challenges of public health writing. And also, an important part of this will be that I will be showing you some of the resources that we have here at the school and other external resources that you can use to work on your writing. So I am going to actually, if you guys don't mind, I'm going to keep it like this because I want to be able to see you. Um, the agenda today, we'll talk about writing as a process and a practice. We'll talk about some of the characteristics of public health writing in particular, and then we'll talk about writing resources. So let's go. I would love for you in the chat to introduce yourself and tell me or tell the rest of us as a group a bit about your relationship to writing. Do you enjoy it? Do you dislike it? Do you fear it? What is your writing process? Do you get to work right away? Do you procrastinate? Do you have a lot of experience maybe with professional or public health writing? Anything you want to write. Um, and if you could share that in the chat, I'll give you a few minutes to do that, and then we can discuss a bit. So one thing I want to encourage you to do is be honest about whether or not you like writing, because I am deeply ambivalent about it often, even though I consider myself to be a writer and I am certainly a writing teacher. So this is a place where you can be honest about your feelings about writing. And if you love it, awesome. Okay, so Jordan, thank you. I used to hate writing, but I've grown to like it a little. I love to procrastinate also. Do you mind, Jordan, saying a bit more about that? Had, what was it that helped you start to like writing?
I think it's like as I got better at writing, I started to like it more. I used to be really bad at it. So when I didn't like it, I would get bad grades and it was just not a good
Okay,
cycle.
and so then you decided you realized it was necessary and that sort of what, so what aspects of it do you now occasionally enjoy?
I think it's relaxing sometimes. I'm like, uh, I guess just a way to get out what I'm thinking.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. It's an important way to kind of express yourself, to process, and there's so many different types of writing. We're going to be talking about public health writing and, professional writing today. But, a lot of people are journal or, are creative writers. It's something that we don't get a lot of time to talk about creative writing in the in the public health program, but it's a really useful thing to do on a daily basis because any kind of writing just kind of helps you to sit down and do, the writing that you have to do for your job or for school. So thank you, Maria. My name is Maria. I really struggle with writing, especially academic writing. Try not to procrastinate. That's good. It's so hard. Set up an outline. I'm working in an office with other people, so you're just going to listen. Okay, great. Thank you for letting me know that. So Patrice, hi everyone. My name is Patrice. I live in Columbia, South Carolina. Are you in Columbia, South Carolina right now? So you're an online student?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Great. I'm diligently working to change your procrastination. It's difficult. And then
Yes.
Grayson, you're from Wellesley, so you're local. Are you in the in-person program, Grayson, or are you an online student as well?
I'm in person.
Okay. Okay, great. So let's see. My relationship to writing is that for the most part, I enjoy doing it, but sometimes I have a hard time getting started. So my next question for you, if you don't mind jotting it down in the chat, is what is your writing process? When you have something that you either have to work on or want to work on, like what do you do? How do you get yourself in the chair? And I'll tell you a little bit about my writing process. And for a very long time, I taught writing, but I didn't do a lot of writing because, like all of you, everything else in the world and in my job and in my life got in the way of it. And then I don't know, several years ago, I was reading something and I read somewhere somebody was talking about how they write for 15 minutes a day, and that that if they can do at least 15 minutes, 5 days a week, then they're happy. If they can do a little bit longer than that, up to a half hour a day, great, but 15. And I thought to myself, I can do 15 minutes a day. So I now have a ritual. And if you don't have a writing ritual, I encourage you to develop one. Whether you try to develop a daily writing ritual or just something that you do that helps you get in the chair and be happy about being there. Um, so for me, what I live close to campus. I walk into campus. I walk into the South End. I live in Roxbury, and I go to a cafe. So if for those of you who are here on campus, I go to Jaho every morning and I get my mocha and I read a little bit and I drink my coffee and I make myself happy. And then I open up some document and I set a timer. So I did that today, and I set my timer for 20 minutes and then I ended up working for an extra 10. And you may think to yourself, there's no way you can get anything done in that amount of time. But if you do it regularly, and you keep coming back, you really can develop and get get your work done. I wrote an entire book that way. So I wrote a book that came out in 2022 called Teaching Public Health. And yes, I did have longer spurts of time that I spent on it, but it was mostly in my daily ritual of going to Jaho and setting my timer and writing for a certain amount of time. Because for a long time, I would do things like every Thursday, I'm not going to do anything else. I'm just going to write. And then Thursday would come and there'd be a bunch of emails, and then people would want to talk to me. And then I'd open my document and start to get to work, and I wouldn't remember what I was working on. So then I'd have to remind myself, and it just didn't work for me. So figuring out what works for you is really important. But does anybody else want to share your writing process? And we all have one, whether you think you have one or not. What is it that you do when you get to that you do to get yourself in the chair? You never thought about it, Patrice, but it's listening to music. So is
Yeah.
there a particular type of music that you have to put on?
Um, I'm thinking probably I know this is like two different ends of the spectrum, but either gospel or R&B. R&B.
Okay. Well, I
So
mean,
either one of those.
and they aren't so different, actually, I guess.
Right. 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 That is true. Yeah.
So, yeah, and do you listen to it like on headphones or do you just have it low in the background?
I have it on a little speaker that I have, a little JBL speaker
Okay.
that I have. I didn't realize that they were so, you know, they really pronounce sound to be so little. So I have to keep it down a little bit lower, but it's just enough for me to know that it's present, but not overtake my thoughts.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's great. That's great. Anyone else want to share any aspect of like what you do to get yourself in the chair? Do you have to like you know, get yourself a nice latte or make a cup of coffee or make a cup of tea so that you can hold that warm cup in your hands and, you know, kind of sit there and think as you're getting started. Do you do free writing, anything like that? Oh, welcome, Maria and Madison. So maybe I'll call on somebody if you can talk. Oh, Maria, we already know that we already talked to you. You're at work. So Grayson, what about you? What do you do to get yourself in the chair?
Um, Sometimes I first try to like brainstorm ideas about what I want my paper to be about, and then I'll try to make like an outline.
Okay. Yeah, an outline can be really helpful. You know, I think there are different types of writers. There are some people who never use an outline, and you know, at some point, especially when you're working on public health documents, like you need an outline. In other cases, sometimes you don't. And you know, I think the thing about an outline that's super helpful is that it it can change. You know, it's a thing that kind of gets you started. It creates a roadmap for you. It allows you to not have a blank page anymore, and then you can get started. And so much of what we do in public health writing is kind of piecemeal. You know, we're writing these different sections, so it's helpful to know what those sections are and be putting down ideas about what you want to put in them. So I'm going to move on to the next slide. So writing is a practice and a process. So I keep asking you what your process is. And I just told you both about my writing process, but that I also have what is now more or less a daily or at least 5 day a week practice. And so we have this writing program here at the School of Public Health. I think we're one of the few schools of public health that actually has like a named writing program. And our kind of mission is that everyone, no matter how experienced, confident, or anxious you are about your writing, benefits from taking a deliberate practice approach. Writing is difficult. We all struggle. We all need feedback. We all need to revise. The process is few shortcuts, but working hard at it has many rewards. So during your time here at SPH, we encourage you to engage in this idea of a deliberate practice approach to your writing. And you know, one of the things that's kind of fundamental to that is just realizing that the first draft you write, any draft you write, is going to be flawed. And so, you know, the more kind of time you can give to it, and what I mean is if you start early and even if you're working on it for 15 minutes a day, it helps you kind of, you know, make those small changes and make it closer to what you want it to be. And so if that helps any of you with your procrastination, then you know, try it out and set a timer. It's really fun. I actually, I have this timer that I don't actually set because the ticking bothers me, but I couldn't, I had a really hard time at first remembering to set the timer on my phone. So this guy reminds me to do that, but so that's really what we want you to be thinking about and doing here at the School of Public Health. We don't expect you to already know how to be public health writers because public health writing is actually quite different in some ways. And, you know, it's all about audience and purpose. You know, you need to be thinking about who will be reading your work. What does your reader need from you? What do you want them to take away from it? And what are you trying to accomplish? And some of you may be used to doing that type of writing. I did my MPH here a very long time ago. And when I started my MPH, so I had a PhD already, but it was in English literature. I had been teaching composition, freshman composition, etc., for quite some time. But then I got here and I thought, oh, I can write these papers, no problem. And I I was really challenged by them because they were so different from what I was used to. I was used to, getting an assignment if I was in a literature class saying, analyze this novel, 20 pages, pick a social theme, and then, apply it to the novel and think of the novel through that lens. And if I had a thesis statement or a stated objective in there anywhere at all, sometimes it was on the 10th page. And I did a lot of just like stringing quotes together. That was the type of writing I was used to. And that type of writing is fine when you're in the humanities. It's what you learn how to do and you become good at. But it doesn't really work for public health. So I actually had to kind of completely learn how to write. I had to relearn how to write. And it's something that I'm still in the process of doing. So one thing that I hope you'll remember, and you can, whenever you're feeling challenged about your writing, is just remember that all of your professors, no matter how accomplished they are, we all struggle with writing. And we've all kind of found our own ways. But an interesting conversation is to ask your professors, about their relationship to writing. It's very interesting because we all do really struggle in different ways. It's always something different with each new project, but you're always trying to kind of make it better. And yeah, so those are kind of the key hallmarks: audience and purpose. I wasn't used to writing for a reader who was somebody other than my professor. And here you're writing for your professor, but you often have assignments that are very kind of targeted at, we give you a scenario and we tell you, you work for X organization and they're asking you to do Y. And, you have to kind of put yourself in that position, and then you have to create do research and create a document that matches what you're being asked to do. So this is the other thing about public health writing that I think can be tricky, is there's so many different types. Like I told you that when I started here as a student, I was used to doing pretty much one type of writing, and it fit none of these. It was kind of like a literature review, but it was also quite different. It was a very different kind of a literature review. But some of the things that we write in public health that you'll write in your classes, and that you'll certainly write if you go on to a career in public health, are funding proposals, research protocols, literature reviews, policy briefs, situation analysis. In your if you're taking ICPH, PH 720, the core, then you're working on a determinants and strategies analysis. I think that's what they're still calling it. But there are many other types of writing, and I'm just wondering, do you have examples of other types of writing that you've done in your public health classes or in your work as a public health person that can add to this list?
Did you want us to put it in the chat or?
No, you can just jump in. Sorry
Oh,
for not being clear
okay,
about
no
that.
problem.
Yeah. And so since you're in the online program, I'm guessing maybe that you already work in public health. Is that true?
Yes, I have worked in public health.
Okay.
Yes. I actually got my undergrad in public health with
Okay.
a concentration in community health education.
Okay.
And shortly after I graduated, I was able to get a job at a nonprofit organization as a program assistant for a community level intervention that they had received funding for. And so within that, they always have other duties as assigned and stuff. One of those duties ended up being me creating the volunteer like packet, informational
Okay.
packet
Yeah.
and whatnot, explaining to them, what it was and, the program itself. And
Yeah.
because it was it is a very well-known aid service organization, but they provide other resources. It was really imperative that we made sure to like not feed into that stigma,
Okay.
and like make it as welcoming as possible.
Okay.
So yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So handbooks, and this whole idea of many different audiences, that we're often writing for other experts. We're often writing for people who are experts, but they're not expert in what it is that we're writing about. Because, public health is a multidisciplinary, everything field, interdisciplinary field. So we're always trying to, um, at least at its best, welcome people into our writing and not push them out. I think that when I say at its best, that's the ideal. I think sometimes we get so hung up on our jargon and our abbreviations and all of that that we lose sight of that. But that for me is the ideal, and also for people at all different types of education levels and sort of levels of reading and writing confidence themselves. So, you really have to kind of know your audience and know what your purpose is. So great. That's an excellent example. So handbooks, descriptions of programs that you are working on, curricula for classes or for trainings. The list kind of goes on and on and on. So there are many different types, and maybe you'll be lucky. And one of them also being peer-reviewed journal articles. Maybe you'll be an academic and a researcher, and that's mostly what you'll write. That in addition to like funding proposals and research protocols. But, often we have to do all sorts of other things. So we have to really pay attention to the instructions. And I think that was another thing that was really a challenge. It sounds stupid, but it was a challenge for me when I started as an MPH student, because once again, I wasn't used to detailed instructions. So I would read them once and I go, oh yeah, okay, fine. And then I do what I wanted to do. And then the professor would be like, well, you're a good writer, but you didn't do what you were supposed to do. And so, it was humbling. And it was humbling in a ultimately in a good way, although being humbled can be painful, as you're kind of going through the process. But so yeah, many different types, and we're always learning, and we need to, always be looking at what that person or institution or our boss or whoever, our professor, says that they want, what they're looking for, and then we have to tailor it to that purpose. So with all of that said, we have, as I noted, a bunch of resources here at the School of Public Health, and I'm going to tell you how to get to them. And yeah, so one place that you can find them, and I will actually put this presentation in the chat before we go, but so that then you can have a copy of it. But if for some reason I forget to do that, just let me know. Email me, jenbeard@bu.edu, and I'll send it to you. But and everything is linked here, but you can also just type in Public Health Writing Program BUSPH, and it will take you to this page. And this page has all sorts of resources. We have a writing, a public health writing guide. And so you can go here. This is one place you can go. Another place that you can go, and it's even a better place to go. And if you were at the training last week or even the week before, Kristen showed you this. So Kristen helped me put together, and she maintains it, this public health writing resource guide, because even though we had that web page on the BUSPH page, it just was kind of clunky, and it was hard to gather everything in one place, because I also started a blog where I started writing essays for students and for writers about things that I was noticing in the writing that I was reading. So this writing resource guide, which once again, you can just Google Public Health Writing Resource Guide, and it will take you to this one. And if for some reason you get lost, you can put in BU, Alumni Medical Library Public Health Writing Resource Guide, and you'll get there. But this has everything all in one place. So I have, as I just said, there are the recordings for the trainings, that there will be a recording for this training, recordings for the trainings we did last week, other trainings that we've kind of done in the past. And like I said, I have a blog where I've written things occasionally that may be useful to you. So, one of the articles there is public health writing. It's all about audience and purpose. Public health writing is deliberate practice, one of 3 parts. An introduction to analytical writing in public health. That was not me. That is a video that was created by another professor here. But there's lots of useful stuff on there. And some of the other kind of articles that you can find, and these are actually just links to the trainings that we did in the last couple of weeks. But hone your paraphrasing skills, that's me. And then also, because remember I told you that I was used to doing a lot of quoting, one of the things that I learned pretty quickly is we don't do a lot of quoting in public health writing. We do a lot of paraphrasing. We usually reserve quotes for when when the words really matter, when we're talking about like legislation or policy, and we really need to get the exact wording. Otherwise, we're often paraphrasing. So if that's something that you're not feeling all that confident about, you can watch the video, and then you can also read these things. For those of you who are on-campus students, we also have the Peer Writing Coach program, where you can make an appointment with a writing coach, and you can talk to them, get feedback from them, and it's not a remedial type of thing. It's for anyone. And that is something that you can do if you're an online student. And I apologize if you're not an online student, an in-person student. If you're an online student, that's not available. But you can take that up with the higher powers if you want to. But these are all the things that if you have access to that program because you're an in-person student, you can make an appointment for brainstorming, outlines, feedback on drafts. It's also a really nice way to meet other students who've been here for a while. And it's actually one of the first programs in the country where we created a peer writing coach program at a school of public health, rather than sending you off to like the English department. So all of these students have written the assignments that you're writing, especially in the core courses. So, you can learn from their experience and just get feedback from somebody who helps you, put another set of eyes on your work. So what you need to do you can link to it from either one of those pages that I just showed you. You can also just type it in. You have to create an account, very easy, and sign up, and then you'll be able to see the schedule and create an appointment. So some other things that are more generally available for everyone that aren't associated with the School of Public Health, but that I think are incredibly useful, and I really encourage you to check them out. Roy Peter Clark is one of my favorite writers about writing. He's a journalism professor and a journalist, and he's written many books about writing. And you're maybe thinking, how boring is that? But his writing about writing is so like fun, and he's so kind of humble about the writing process and about how hard it can be sometimes to be clear and concise, which is what we want to do in public health almost all the time. We're always trying to be clear and concise, and that's a difficult thing to do. So one thing that he created, and this is actually online, it's free, and you can find it by Googling that title, 20 Questions Toward Achieving Civic Clarity in Your Writing, where he has 20 questions. These are just the first 3. that you can ask yourself and kind of interrogate your writing. So, the first one is, how would I explain this to a smart person who I know who's not an expert? Okay, I've written it, or I need to write it and I want to write it in a way that somebody who isn't an expert can understand. And I love the part, the smart person I know, because it helps you visualize an actual human being. Sometimes that can be really helpful. We're always talking about audience, but you're like, what is that? Who is that? And just picturing a human being who you know and respect, who isn't an expert, can sometimes be really helpful as you're trying to write something. The next one is kind of a variation on that. What are the 3 most important things I learned? This is kind of what once you have written something that I learned as I was doing my research and writing that I now need to unlearn to avoid the so-called curse of knowledge, which is starting not with what you know, but what your readers don't know, and sort of taking yourself and putting yourself in that position of the reader. Another one, and this is probably, of all of the feedback that I give to students on papers and in the editing that I do for public health posts, the most common comment I make in general is, break up this long sentence, because we love to write long sentences in science and technical writing and in public health writing. And we're often trying to cram so much information into long sentences that we don't leave room to actually work in the important details and the small ways that we can explain things and make things more clear. So I am somebody, as a writer, who I'm very verbose. I use a lot of words, way more than I usually need. And I also I'm sort of drawn to writing long, complex sentences. But I've now learned that I need to break them up most of the time. So when I'm going through the writing process, if I'm just starting to write, I'll just let myself write lots of words and lots of long sentences. And then I'll go back and I'll say, okay, can I break this up? If a sentence is more than 3 lines, I'll try and break it up. And I'll do the same with a paragraph. So this whole idea of slowing down, how do you slow down? You slow down by creating space, by breaking up your paragraphs and creating a little bit more room to work in the details. So that's a really useful resource. You can use a checklist. And this is my checklist. This is a checklist that I always have in my head when I'm reading other people's work, and when I'm giving them feedback, and also when I'm working on my own. So you can create your own checklist. You can use mine. You can take some things from mine, add some things of yours. But these are the things that I'm often looking for. So is there a clear thesis or objective at the end of the first or second paragraph? One thing about public health readers is that they're very busy, they're distracted, they have short attention spans. So you want to catch them immediately, not on page 10, but halfway through the first page, maybe even sooner than that, and just lay it out. And you can be really clear, like, the objective of this policy brief is to XYZ. If you write that at first in your first draft, because it helps you kind of just lay it out, then when you're revising, if you want, you can take out the objective of this policy. But it's sometimes really helpful just to put it in there in that way, because you're flagging it, you're showing your reader, and you're reminding yourself of like what your point is. So section headers, that was something I was also not used to writing with when I started the MPH program. And now I can't write without them. And, I mentioned before that the types of writing that you do here in the School of Public Health, it's often broken up into chunks. If you're thinking about a peer-reviewed journal article, it has a standard outline, and you kind of put those description headers in there, and each each section kind of has its own thing that it does. So using section headers that are descriptive, that aren't just like, yes, you can use ones that just say background, methods, findings, but you can also like use that space to just flag for your reader, this is what this paragraph is going to be about. So often I'll have when I'm doing like Q&A with students, they'll say, but are we allowed to use section headers? And you are not only allowed to use them, you should use them. You know, maybe there will be some assignment somewhere in some class where you're not supposed to use them, but I doubt it very much. And when in doubt about any aspect of a writing assignment from a professor in one of your classes, ask. I'm always encouraging my colleagues to take time in class to say, does anybody have questions? Where are you? And to sort of talk about the writing assignments. But we have so many other things to talk about that we sometimes forget to do that. So raise your hand, you know, at the beginning of class and say, hey, I have a question. And you're doing a public service, because if you have a question, there are probably a lot of other people who have that same question. And we don't mind when you ask those questions. It's very helpful to us. So you can also, you know, ask your TA privately. You can ask your professor privately, but it often is really useful to just do it, you know, publicly and raise your hand, because other people will have that question. So that, I got a little off topic, but one thing that I do, and one thing that you can watch out for in your own writing, especially if you feel like maybe you have a tendency to write vague sentences where they just kind of meandering and it's not clear what the point is, or you have a lot of sentences that each one makes a good point, but it's not clear within the paragraph, kind of like what they're all adding up to. It can often be because you've started each sentence with these really vague words like it is, this is, there are, this, there is. There's nothing wrong with starting sentences that way. Well, if you're going to use it is or this is or these, then you want those you want those things to be referring to something you've already talked about, so the reader isn't wondering. But sometimes we're often just kind of throwing them in there because we're being kind of lazy. And especially if you need to be more concise and you're just trying to make your writing more tight and strong and clear, that's an easy way to go back through your writing, and you can even just highlight all of them and then, you know, say, what is this sentence about? I started it with it is, but I don't even know what the it in this sentence is. So, you know, this is a sentence about X. I'm going to actually take it and make that the first word of the sentence. So, you know, it's something that you can do. Once again, these are things often that you don't want to do when you're drafting, because you don't want to censor yourself. You want to get the words on the page. These are things that if you've given yourself some time, and maybe you're working a little bit every day, or you do have time to revise, then these are things you can do. So here's an example of what I was just talking about. So strengthening subjects and verbs of sentences. So 2 cars need to be washed. So the subject there is cars, and the verb is need, or they need to be washed, the extended verb, I guess. You can say that, or you can say there are 2 cars that need to be washed. That takes more room, and it doesn't add anything to the sentence. It kind of weakens the sentence, actually. And in fact, you could, if it fit, make that first sentence even stronger, because that first one is passive. You know, it's cars needing to be washed. If, you know, depending on what it is that you're writing, you could also say, John needs to wash 2 cars, or I need to wash 2 cars, or whatever it is, but just something to think about. So cutting unnecessary words, this is one way to do that. For me, I also have, maybe some of you have pet peeves about writing, things that you read and you're just like, oh, that drives me crazy when people do that. For me, the one thing that I try to revise out of everything that I write is the word issue. And I try to get other people to do it too, because we overuse it to the extent that everything in public health is an issue. And, you know, if you do a search in your paper just looking for the word, you can see how many times it pops up. And if it's there a lot, then you can say, you know what, this is a way that I can make my writing a little bit more specific. So, you know, find other words that you can put in its place. Another one that I think we really struggle with in public health and in science and technical writing is that we are addicted to abbreviations and acronyms. And I think sometimes, especially students and kind of junior researchers, feel like they have to use abbreviations. Of course, some abbreviations have become words. We know what they are. We know what HIV is. We know what COVID is. We often know, you know, what LGBTQ means. So there are some that are in common parlance, but there are a lot of others that can just clutter up your writing. So that's another thing you can do to improve clarity, is go through and just look at all your abbreviations and say, do I really need these? Are they really helping me be more concise? Are they helping me be more clear? Can I get rid of them? Personally, I try to never use them, but I usually end up, other than things like HIV, COVID, you know, ones that have become words in and of themselves. But it's hard to not use them in public health writing, but, you know, see if you can limit yourself to one or two abbreviations. And then, of course, there's using language that anyone can understand. So reducing technical jargon whenever possible. And I think sometimes, yeah. Somebody have a question? No? Okay. Yeah, so technical jargon. And one thing that happens, I think also, once you are getting used to being a public health writer or a science and technical writer, is that you don't even recognize your jargon anymore. You know, we assume that everybody knows what prevalence and incidence mean, or what an intervention is. So, you know, you can try to go through and sort of underline, you know, kind of keywords that you're like, you know, is this really something that anybody is going to understand? And once again, you're thinking about your audience. So it could be that your audience understands the word intervention, and that's fine. You know, you can keep it. But the whole point of this checklist, and some of the things I'm going to show you next, are really just to help you, once you've written something, to kind of take a little hammer and kind of like crack it, you know, like a piece of ice, and you create these fissures. And so that you can say, oh, here are some ways that I can revise. Here are some small ways, because small changes can often have a really big impact. So here are some other resources. So I was just telling you about Roy Peter Clark. He is awesome. I have his book right here, Writing Tools. You can see that it's filled with post-it notes and scribbling. I use it all the time. You can access it for free at the library. You can just, you know, look for on the BU library Writing Tools, and they'll be able to access an electronic copy. And each tool is about 2 or 3 pages, and they're very specific, and they give you kind of activities that you can do to your own writing that can help you kind of pay attention to specific things. He also has a podcast that's pretty cute, where each one of these 2 to 3 page tools is its own little like pod. So, you know, he's got the tool 1 is like 1 or 2 minutes, tool 2, 2 or 3 minutes. So you can access them there at this link. Another really useful thing that you can do is what's called the paramedic method of editing. And you can find this if you go to another really great writing resource that I don't have linked on here, but you should jot down, is the Purdue OWL Online Writing Lab but you can just put in Purdue OWL. There's so many great writing resources in there, but you can do Purdue OWL paramedic method of editing. And I think this actually this links to that at least. And it gives you some steps you can take, you know, to go through and do something like circle all your prepositional phrases because you're trying to reduce your wordiness and just get rid of unnecessary words. There's nothing wrong with writing with prepositional phrases. You can't do that. You can't write in English without them, but we often overuse them. So it's, once again, one of those things that can be helpful. So here is, you know, some of the activities that it gives you to do if you're trying to self-edit. So these are some key things that I hope will be helpful to you as you are writing. And I'm going to just take a second. We have time for, well, it's 1:47. This was supposed to run only until 1:50. So you're welcome to leave, but you can also stick around for a little bit and I can answer questions if you'd like. I'm just going to take a second though and put this this presentation in the chat for you. Okay, there you go. You should be, if you put it into viewer mode, you should be able to, or slideshow mode, you should be able to access all the links. So what questions do you have? I've been talking a lot, but you may have specific questions about just kind of the stuff I was talking about the resources that we have, or just kind of about writing in general. And you can just blurt them out. You don't have to put them in the chat since there are so few of us.
It's not really a question, but I was laughing because when you were talking about using abbreviations, I also worked for our local state health department as a contracts administrator, and I was over all of the Ryan White and prevention and all that whole division's contracts and stuff. And I was talking to my best friend about this grant, and I was like, yeah, the INHOS and da da da. She was like, INHOS, is that German?
What are
And
you
I'm
talking
like,
about?
and I'm just saying it thinking like, of course she'll, you know, figure out what it is. And I was like, oh yeah, everybody doesn't know that, you know, they
Yeah,
don't work with it and stuff like that. Yeah. So
yeah.
I thought that was very funny.
And you know, they can really pile up. Like, here's an
Mhm.
example. If you're talking about like global health and HIV. So HIV can lead to OVC, which is Orphans of Vulnerable Children. You know, many children whose parents have HIV end up being OVC. And then you have mothers who use PMTCT. So, you know, you can end up like creating sentences
Yeah.
that are just this jumble of letters. And that's nice shorthand for you when you're writing, but it's really important to remember to go back through and think about your reader. And I love that your friend asked you if that was German.
Yeah. She was like, is that German? And I'm like, and she had a straight face, and I'm like, oh yeah, you don't know what that yeah.
And Amanda, you had a question. I'm sorry if you already said this. Will you be sending out the recording? Yes, I will. I will be sending it out to all the core courses. I'm not sure if the professors are actually sharing them. Hopefully they are. I'll also be sharing it with Paris and the online program. But if you don't get access to it for some reason, just send me an email. Like I said, jenbeard@bu.edu, and I'll be happy to send it to you. It takes a little while for the recording to process, but I can probably do it later on today. So it was lovely to see all of you. One thing I want to mention is I've been talking to a different librarian named Katie Sweeney, and we're working on developing another 1 hour training that's going to be in sometime in October. I think it's like Thursday the 23rd or something like that. I'll be sending out information about it. It's on the calendar already, the SPH events calendar, but will be about AI. So best practices for using AI, like when to use it, when not to use it, how to use it, how not to use it. And Katie is a emerging technologies librarian, a specialist in addition to being an education librarian. So it'll be, I think, a really informative conversation. So hope to see you then, and I'll be sending out information about that. So thank you so much. It was so nice to see all of you, or to see your names.
Thank you so much. All right.
Thank
those
you
of you
very
who-
much.
Bye-bye.